Hi all, welcome to this Xalient webinar. I appreciate you spending the time to join us, talking all things SSE and SASE. I'm here with my colleague Stephen Amstutz. Before we get into a little bit of background on myself and Xalient, Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Martin, and thanks for joining everyone. My name's Stephen. I've been at Xalient for probably about 8.5 years now. And initially as a principal consultant. I've got a strong background in networking and cybersecurity, and then more recently as the Director of Innovation. Thank you.
Good, okay. Over to me, I guess. So I've been in this industry for, way too long now. Before the IBM PC, before the internet, before the mobile phone. So I've seen, lots of changes, as I'm sure you have as well. I started at Xalient, I think I was 12th person in, and we're now 400 plus, I think, with a kind of global growth, really. And for that, I've been at seven years now, I think. And over that time, we've grown, as I've said, in terms of the number of people, but we've also grown in terms of the technologies we work with and the customers we work with. And from the beginning, really, we helped organisations connect users and devices to applications and data securely and efficiently. And there's a lot involved in that, which is part of what we're talking about today, really. I guess the real couple of key things about Xalient, really, is that different to a lot of organisations in this kind of reseller space that we sit in, I think where we're really strong is in the services around all of that, isn't it? And advisory, design, deploy and run, which is a big area of our focus. So we actually help customers get these things working and adding value for them, really. Our main markets are the UK, the US and Europe, and we do that really through operating bases in the UK, the US, Europe in the Benelux region, Romania, India. So a huge growth globally. And the sort of things we're helping customers with can be anything from endpoint detection, response, identity, secure web gateway, SD-WAN. They're the kind of main areas we work in, I guess, really, and those services around it, as I've said. So for some customers, it could be that whole transformation, and for others, it might just be part of that transformation. And I guess our methodology, what we try and do really, is make everything very outcome-based. You know, what is it the customer needs to achieve, and that's what we try and achieve, I guess. So with all of that said, let's jump in. Why does the SSE versus SASE debate miss the point for legal IT leaders, Stephen?
Sure. So I think you hit the nail on the head when you were introducing Xalient and talking about our approach as being outcome-based. It really is about the outcomes. The technology is the cool bit, the bit that has all the buzzwords and that everybody focuses on. But really, it's what is the problem on the person's desk, and how can we solve those challenges? And really, we see four main areas that resonate very well within the legal sector that I wanted to cover off today. And those are regulation, user experience, securing data and access, and mergers and acquisitions.
Okay, so I guess each of those is a challenging area for different reasons, and I get what you say. I see this across all industries, but particularly from what I hear from our legal customers, these are definitely some key areas, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd like to drill in a little bit to each of them, and I'm going to start with regulation.
Okay.
The first thing we see in regulation is really the proliferation of different standards that need to be adhered to. And we often think initially about the IT-based regulations, but it's not just IT-based regulations. If you think about process-based regulations, that could be like health and safety or environmental type regulations. These are often enabled by IT. So whereas they're not an IT regulation, having the right systems in place and having the right protection around those systems is very, very important. And then also, of course, it's not just the legal sector having to adhere to their own regulations, but then you've got that onward supply chain.
Yeah.
So if they are servicing financial companies,
Yeah.
then they're having to adhere to those financial regulations as well.
Yeah, so customers, I think, are putting a lot of pressures on legal firms, aren't they? That's where a lot of their regulation is coming from. Customers having certain requirements of them if they want them as a customer, really.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Makes sense.
And I guess that's where you could say, from a customer's perspective, this is not just a challenge; it can also be an opportunity.
Yeah.
Because having those regulations ahead of the time when you're going for new business can be that real differentiator to help win that business.
Makes sense.
It becomes very important.
Yeah. Okay.
The next thing I wanted to talk about was reputation.
Yeah.
And obviously by adhering to these regulations, it then becomes a very good way to demonstrate that you are doing things the right way. And if you are doing things the right way, then you're maintaining that healthy reputation.
Yeah.
The last thing you want is an issue because you didn't adhere to something, or because you had certain security controls that were lax, and then the reputational damage that can come along with that. So if you think of regulations as kind of the floor of compliance,
Yeah.
we've always got new technology coming along that's raising the ceiling, and you may not always want to be at that cutting edge of the newer technologies, but you definitely want to be ahead of the cyber criminals. So therefore you need to be constantly updating and adhering to the newer regulations as they come.
Okay, so really what we're saying is, I suppose a little bit, I think you picked up on it there really, is this is potentially an opportunity rather than a threat. And if you use this baseline regulation that you need to achieve, you can use that to achieve better things in your business generally, really.
Exactly.
Get ahead of the curve and start dealing with things in a better way.
Exactly, yes. And then the final thing in that area would be insurance. And obviously there is a cost that comes with those insurance policies. There's also the ability to get those policies in the first place. And more we're seeing these regulations forming a part of the requirements before that insurance will be granted.
Yeah.
So if you think of all of the intellectual property and customer-specific data that is residing within your IT systems, being able to ensure that is very, very important.
Yeah, and it's getting harder to get that insurance now, isn't it?
It's getting harder. It's also getting more expensive.
Yeah.
So the more you can prove that you're adhering with these regulations, the more likely it is you'll be able to get that insurance at a more affordable cost point.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So we've dealt there a bit about regulation. You mentioned also user experience.
Yes.
What are your thoughts there?
So user experience is extremely important, especially when it comes to combating things like shadow IT.
Okay.
The first thing I'd cover in user experience would be ease of access.
Yeah.
Now we want our systems to be secure, and to make them secure, you often have to put extra checks and balances in place. If those checks and balances are adding additional friction to access your systems, then it's going to become much more likely that your users are going to look for easier alternatives.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So it's really important we design the security to rather enhance the user experience than to hinder the user experience. We want the easiest way to access to also be the most secure way to access, and therefore our users aren't going to look for shadow IT resources.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because that's the sort of thing that drives me insane. If it's not easy and simple, and I can see an easier and simpler way, I'm straight down that path, right? So
exactly.
And the one that I think you and I talked about this some time ago, actually, didn't we? It was the iPhone and the way that just Face ID on the iPhone, and all of a sudden, right, you're into it. You don't need to be typing a passcode. That's a really good example that everyone probably can kind of resonate with.
Exactly, and so much more secure than the alternative, which is typing in a password and takes so much longer.
Yeah, so more secure, easier, everyone wins.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And the next one, which is, I guess, kind of related to ease of access, but it's once you're accessing your data or your application, how well is it performing?
Yeah.
our productivity is pretty much based on the performance of our IT. So we want to make sure that regardless of where we are, that access is really performing well, and then it's not a hindrance to us doing our daily job.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that is from a kind of employee satisfaction perspective, some of this gets really important, doesn't it? I think we all know since COVID how difficult it's been maybe to retain staff and find the right staff. But if you've got the right staff, let's keep hold of them. Let's give them a work environment which makes it easy for them to do their job, make them feel comfortable and happy. That's got to be a good thing, right?
Exactly. We all know what that frustration's like if things are running slow.
Yeah.
And we don't really want our employees becoming frustrated.
Yeah, 100%. And the consistent access, I think you touched on there, which is really important, is that whether you're at home, in the office, I guess this is what you're getting at, you want the same experience, so you're not having to learn a different way to get in when you're in the office to when you're at home, that sort of thing, is it?
Exactly. So the look and feel's the same, but more importantly, the performance is the same. We have we had customers during COVID that were going home and finding that their broadband at home was better quality than what they had in the office, and I think that's where it becomes really important that office being a very high density of users, that the connectivity we have in there is a lot different to what your requirements would be at home to provide an equal service. Yeah, no,
it makes total sense, and we all see that, I think. In terms of data, securing data and access, this is a massive one in legal, obviously, reputational damage and lost data, etc. So really important. What are your thoughts on that area, Stephen?
I touched on one of those earlier when I was talking about shadow IT, and how that user experience contributes to shadow IT. I think that's probably one of the biggest vectors that we need to close down to be able to adhere to regulations I spoke about earlier, but also to make sure that data stays secure. We're storing a lot of customer data that's confidential to those customers. We want to make sure they're in our controlled systems, and we want to have checks and balances in place to make sure that they that can't move into non-policed systems.
Okay. And other areas, data loss?
Yeah, data loss is one of the biggest ones. So I'll give you an example of that. Let's say you're a Microsoft customer and all your data sitting in Office 365. We need to make sure that not only can you access Office 365 securely, but then that you're accessing your own tenant in Office 365. And you can't take data out of your tenant and put it into somebody else's tenant, or if you leave, you can't take a lot of data with you. So we need to have more than just that kind of protection to allow you to a particular website. We also need to know what you're doing when you're at that website. Okay.
And one of the things that we've seen a big change with, I guess, at Xalient, we've now become a huge identity practice, obviously, as you know, working with lots of different technologies and helping people really understand how important identity is now. Do you want to just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I think that as a foundation, identity is hugely important, because every decision we make from a security perspective has got to be based on who is trying to connect to something, and also what they're trying to connect to, so the provenance of the data. So the systems we're going to be talking about later today, whilst it doesn't include identity is the foundation that they make all of their decisions on.
Okay, so that's the bedrock, really. If you don't know who the people or the device is that's connecting, you can't make appropriate decisions, I guess.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, so one thing that, again, you touched on earlier as one of these key areas where we see some challenges, and this is what I see just across the board, really, is mergers and acquisitions, and also I'd include in there divestitures, because we've been involved in a couple of large divestitures as well. Give us your thoughts on some of the challenges in those areas, because this is all about agility and growth, and it's a really difficult area, I think, around security for legal and a lot of different industries, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the biggest ones is once one of those types of events happens, how quickly can we adapt to that? So if we have two companies that we're merging together, how quickly can we get those IT systems working in the same way? So it really comes down to the agility of not just the IT teams, but also the systems that those IT teams have deployed. And quite often this is where we'll see a lot of technical debt that might rear its ugly head. And it's really navigating around that. And if you're the larger company that is acquiring a smaller company, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have the better systems. So do you want to set up that the way that you're doing things, it is such that when the smaller company comes on board, it's very easy to bring them into your systems? Or are you going to have a problem where those smaller companies maybe have better systems than what you had, and then you have those kind of fights as to which system do we use moving forwards?
So I guess with these areas that you've talked about there, what we're talking about is that age-old problem and that battle between agility and security, which certainly 15, 20 years ago was really difficult to get a good balance there. So if we move on now and talk a little bit about the technology, maybe we can help some of the viewers understand how that technology may be able to help. Would that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I said it's not about the technology, but of course we do know it's all driven by technology. And what I really want to get across is the technological choices we make and the way that we deploy those technologies, so the topologies that we decide. Good decisions here, the sum will be greater than its parts.
Okay, so we've started, I guess what we've done really is we've kind of pinned it back. Let's not focus on the technology. Let's start with the business. Let's start with the challenges you've got in the business. Let's start with what the business needs to do. Now what we're going to try and do, I guess, is encapsulate with SSE and SASE how that can then address some of those business challenges, right?
Exactly.
Cool. Okay.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
And the first thing I'd like to address is it isn't SSE versus SASE.
Okay.
SSE is a subset of SASE. And I've just put a small number of components up on a slide here just to explain how they fit within that SASE kind of architecture. Really, A is adding the access piece into SSE. And that access piece, if you're working from home, it's going to be obviously your broadband circuits. If you're in a business location, where I said earlier about the high density of users and that need for additional performance, so that's where we're looking at technologies like SD-WAN to ensure that we can bundle together multiple circuits and we can choose the most performant circuit to put traffic on, and then we can waterfall across to other circuits so we can really deliver that good performance into
that consistent and performant access that you talked about before. Okay, that makes
And then digital experience monitoring is really a big part of this, because we've got dispersed users all over the place. Where they are having performance issues, we need to know where those performance issues come from. Everybody's very quick to blame the network or the security stack for a problem, whereas quite often it could be a user's got 100 tabs open in their web browser and their web browser's running slow, or whatever it might be. It might be their home Wi-Fi, it might be their home broadband. Being able to find the root cause of that does require some information back from the end user's devices. And that's where digital experience monitoring comes in.
And that's massive for our customers. We've got a lot of customers using both that and our Martina product, the AI product, to really help get under the skin of what is the problem and can we get to a quicker resolution.
Exactly. I think that the operational side of things, the deployment side of things, the design side of things is hugely important. Everybody focuses on the initial purchase of the licenses. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's what you do with those licenses, how you feed and water them, that really makes the difference. And then on the SSE side, we've got Secure Web Gateway, we've got CASB, and we've got Zero Trust Network Access. And really, it's how those fit together that is able to bring that consistency to the users. The user doesn't care where the application is that they're connecting to. They just want to know that it's secure and it's performant and they can get to it at any time.
Yeah.
So these components fit together to give you that.
Yeah.
So if I now take those components and I kind of lay them out in a topology, as you can see on the slide, we've got different types of users that could be home-based or remote. We've got different types of applications that could be within the company's control or outside of the company's control. But in all cases, these components fit together to allow that seamless connectivity.
Yeah, and it feels like as this kind of battle between agility and security has gone on and we've reached this kind of SASE point now, it feels like we're a lot more granular in the way that we're able to control things than we ever were before. Is that fair to say?
It is. The only way we could have done this in the past would be if we deployed that security out to every user.
Yeah.
Now that becomes unmanageable and that becomes unaffordable. So going out to the cloud edge, getting as close to the user as you can without going all the way to that user's premises is where we're able to leverage the technology.
Okay.
What we're trying to do here to keep that user's access performant is to bring that security as close as we can to them, which is the edge bit in both SASE and SSE.
Yeah.
So getting as close as possible to them without all of that duplication of having to be kind of on those devices.
Okay. So in terms of this slide and in terms of the kind of general areas we talked about before, things like user experience, for example, how does this technology then help on a specific example maybe of how this helps with something like user experience?
Yeah, sure. As a user, it doesn't matter if I'm working from home or if I'm based in the office. It also doesn't matter if I'm a company employee or a supplier or a customer. If I need to get to a particular application, and again, it doesn't matter where that application's running, I want that access method to be exactly the same. I don't want to have to think, do I need to load up my VPN client first to be able to connect? Do I need to authenticate in a different way? I just want to be able to connect to my application. Yeah. And then once I'm connected to it, I want it to perform in a good way.
Yeah.
And that's what this kind of topology enables. It kind of takes all of that complexity away from the users, so that all they have to do is connect.
Okay, this is good. I think these examples, I think, are what the people watching will kind of want to see. So let's go back to those areas. So we've done UX. So regulation.
So regulation, because most of these technologies now are becoming software defined, we might have enforcement points all over the place. That's what the E is in SASE, that edge, that intelligent edge. But because they're all centrally managed through that software-defined technology, we know we have a central policy, and we know therefore that we have consistent security across the board. So it's very easy to meet those requirements through that central control that we have.
You've talked a little bit about access, so the secure data and access piece. Any other good examples in that area?
Yeah, so the CASB is a good example on there. So the Cloud Access Security Broker. It's able to discern not only are you connecting to a particular product like Office 365, but are you connecting to your own tenant within that Office 365, or are you connecting to somebody else's tenant? And I can have different data loss prevention policies depending on whether that's your tenant or somebody else's tenant. So we can prevent things like you downloading something from your tenant and uploading it to another tenant.
Yeah.
So it gives us a lot of granular control to make sure that data is protected.
Okay, understand all that. That's all good. This next area, M&A, that we talked about a little bit earlier, this is massive for us because as you know, most of our customers are actually decent-sized global businesses, and a lot of them are heavily involved in mergers and acquisitions. And actually thinking about it, the divestiture part has been big for us as well, hasn't it? And we forget about that. Everyone talks M&A, but actually a lot of people wanting to offload part of their business, that can be a similar challenge, right? So do you want to talk to us a little bit about that and how these technologies can help us achieve what we need to in M&A? What's important?
Yeah, sure. I think the most important thing is, we talked about it before, that time to value.
Yeah.
And really it's the agility of this kind of topology that's going to deliver that time to value. The moment that you're trying to add to or remove from a business is where all of that technical debt is going to start to appear.
Yeah.
And having a topology like this allows you, application by application, to very quickly grant access to third parties. Those third parties potentially being an acquisition.
Yeah, and I guess you've got all the challenges of bringing on board potentially into the mother company, as it were, an organisation whose security standpoint you know little about potentially.
Yeah, exactly. So let's say you give them the minimum access you can to some critical systems, and you tie that down to data that is less sensitive, let's say. And then once you've done that, you can concentrate on, well, what is their posture? What do we need to do to their end user devices? And then the identity systems we talked about earlier can look at that posture when it's granting access.
Yeah.
So we can go department by department. We can change their desktop to suit the new regulations. And then the identity system will automatically know that they've been upgraded and maybe give them that extra level of access.
Okay, so again, that's the granularity of these sorts of technologies, the ability to look at things in the little detail for different users that's enabling that.
Yeah, exactly. The identity is not just about me proving you are who you are. It's also understanding what device you are. Is it your own device? Is it a corporate device? Has it met the posture requirements?
Yeah.
All those sorts of things. And not just when you initially access, but continually whilst you're accessing, to make sure that that posture is maintained.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because we know the integration, you mentioned it before, the sum of the parts being, or the sum being greater than the individual parts. And I think this is an important one, isn't it? We've deployed endpoint detection response systems alongside identity and secure web gateway. And the way they communicate with each other means that you end up in this dynamic security environment where something changes and then the rules change, right?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people talk about, just talking about data security now, a lot of people talk about data at rest and data in flight.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about data in use.
Yeah.
And now with the advent of generative AI, lots of people are sending what's confidential data to these, to things like ChatGPT, to often for legitimate business reasons. But how can we avoid sending that raw data to? How can we enforce that people are tokenizing the data before they send it up there? And that's another kind of side effect of these type of systems. That we can do that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And on the divestiture side, do you want to touch on that? Because again, slightly different problems from mergers and acquisitions. What are the differences there, and what are the challenges we see?
Yeah, so traditionally, if you're doing a divestiture, you would have to duplicate pretty much everything. So all of your physical firewalls you've got everywhere, your physical switches, routers, those types of things, you'd be buying another set for the spin-off that you're creating. Because this has the edge running in the cloud, you're just moving licenses around. You're not having to worry about any of that hardware. You're not having to worry about that deployment piece. So it can be very very agile in that perspective to do a spin-off like that.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because as we come on to one of the other questions that I wanted to ask is, okay, so we've got all this great technology, we've got this granular access, this ability to dynamically control security now in a really, really clever way. In terms of maybe the bigger challenge for businesses is, well, when do you do this and how do you do it? And the when's really interesting, isn't it? Because what I'm getting from what you're saying there is maybe this is something that helps prepare you for a path you're going on. If you're at the start of, an acquisitive path, it sounds like this could really help with that time to value and putting you in a good position before you grow the business and then end up with a much bigger problem potentially.
Yeah, exactly that. One of the things that we often do, because every business we deal with, SASE covers quite a lot of areas. It covers networking, it covers security. we cover identity as well, not strictly part of SASE, but it's an important enabler for SASE. Every company will be at a different maturity level in those three domains. So the first thing we would do is assess what those maturity levels are, and we tend to start at the lowest maturity level. So for some companies that might be identity needs to be addressed first. For other companies it might be networking or security that needs to be addressed first. So the idea is to raise the bar for all of those domains.
So on the when and how then, really, that becomes very much down to the customer we're working with then, is that?
Yeah, unfortunately there's no cookie cutter approach. This topology is a good topology for most customers to move towards, but how they move towards that, what area they start in, tends to be different for each customer. So I think that's important, understanding the customer first and where we should start that journey.
Okay. One thing that I think there's a lot of chat about, in legal, but also again in the wider businesses, is the Microsoft situation now, where Microsoft, I think it's fair to say, have made some great strides forward around security now, and I'm not sure it's everything they see it as being yet. I don't know. I'm kind of still learning about it a little bit. But maybe that would be a good area for you to give us some thoughts on, I don't know, E3, E5, because there's a lot in that, and I know a lot of people are thinking, well, how much of this am I paying for already within my E5? Can I get more value out of my E5 license, or do I need to look for a specific tool to do, some aspect of SASE? Does that make sense? Because it
does make sense. Yes.
It's what I hear a lot at the moment.
Yeah, it does make sense. However, the choice of vendor would probably be the last thing I make as we're going through this journey, rather than the first thing I make. So what I mean is, we started very much with those use cases. What are the outcomes the customer's looking for? Once we've kind of understood that, then we look at the technologies that are available to fulfill those outcomes. We do that maturity assessment. We understand what area we should be looking at first. Only then do we have enough of an understanding to say, is Microsoft the right vendor, or is another vendor better able to do that?
We could end up in a big debate here on single vendor, multi-vendor, and all the pros and cons of that. I guess maybe that's another webinar that we'll do in a few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, we talked earlier about the licenses being the tip of the iceberg. So that is that vendor selection piece. It's really the design, the deployment, and the run that are the important bits. Because if you don't feed and water what you put in, it's never gonna live up to what it's meant to do. Okay,
so let me see if I can summarise really, I guess, a little bit of what we've talked about. So start with the problems on your desk. Don't focus at that point about the technology. Understand what it is you're trying to achieve, what outcomes you want. And from there, then start to look at the different technologies available to you, the way those technologies work and interact, and how they can add value to that. Consider your use cases in a lot of detail. And then when you understand those, go and find the technology. And then once you've got the technology, look at the different vendors that can provide that technology for those intricate differences. And I think maybe we will talk about that on another webinar a little bit.
Sure.
Okay. But thanks everyone for joining us. I hope that's given you some insight into the kind of SSE, SASE world. I think from our point of view, I think we found it really useful kind of talking through some of these things. I guess what I'd like to do now is throw the floor open really for questions. So if you've got any questions you'd like to ask us, stick them in the chat, and we'll try our best to answer them for you.